Think.
Diana, thank you very much for joining us on SCOTONOMICS. We're really keen to hear all about the empowering role of local currencies. So would you like to give us an overview of what a local currency is and how it's being used currently in the UK?
I mean, I think it's very tempting to just say local currency is one thing. And I would start off by saying it's not one thing. Every local currency is slightly different. So let's think about some of the key, when you're designing a currency, what are some of the key ideas that you might want to think about? And one is whether or not this currency is backed by fiat, in our case, by sterling. And a lot of people would say there's no point in setting up a currency which is basically just the fiat currency, but with some labels and rules, which is in effect what Bristol Pound was, because they would argue that one of the main reasons for starting a local currency is at a time of recession or depression where perhaps liquidity is very low. So people can't get at money, people can't borrow money from the banks. And there have been many very successful currencies like the Virgil back in the 1930s and like the Palmas Bank in Brazil in the 2000s, where a non-backed currency, basically a load of IOU notes, if you like, but printed and designed, enable people to trade with each other, even though they can't get their hands on real money. That's one sort of currency. And in that same sort of currency, your listeners may have heard of LETs, local economy trading schemes or systems, where, again, it's like IOUs, but usually among community members, where like a babysitting circle, or maybe I borrow your drill and you give me, I give you a Let's token or voucher, and you can then spend that on to I don't know, get a friend to help you put up some shelves. Or those are one sort of currency, if you like. Another sort of currency is the sterling-backed sort, or fiat-backed, which is what Bristol Pound was. And the idea there was not primarily about increasing liquidity. It was about changing the rules of the game. It was about trying to encourage people to shop locally. And the reason that matters is that when you go to one of the big supermarkets, okay, a little bit of your money stays in the locality. It's paying probably minimum wage or not much more to the people stacking the shelves and the cashier and so on. But most of the rest of that money just leaves the locality straight away to head office, to globalized supply chains. And as a result, it doesn't have, the money doesn't have sticking power in the local economy. It's not really helping the local economy to thrive. So the idea of currencies like the Bristol Pound was very much to encourage that money to stick to the city. It could only be spent in independent local businesses who would then spend it on with other local independent businesses in their supply chain. And as a result, that money stays in the city where it's helping those businesses to thrive and in turn create more jobs and more opportunities for people locally. So that was that idea. And that very much came out of the transition town movement, which was about localization, resilience, partly from a point of view of minimizing supply chain, food miles or whatever, that kind of transportation element, but also, as I say, this wider economic resilience and creating more opportunity in the locality.
So do you think, Diana, that Bristol in particular is ripe for this type of scheme? What is it about Bristol that that this kind of scheme is coming about?
I think Bristol has a reputation for being somewhere that is focused on social and environmental issues and that is innovative in its approach to things. And I'm sure that's why the Bristol Pound started in Bristol. I mean, obviously there were other local currencies before in Lewis and Totnes. They were bound to be very limited just because the size of those towns. And I guess one of the ideas about doing this in a city the size of Bristol was that it was large enough that you could have a diverse set of businesses and really create an ecosystem, if you like, of businesses that could trade with each other, that you would get that kind of circularity because there would be enough perhaps enough variety of businesses to make it into its own ecosystem. If it was the perfect place, then maybe we could have made it work long term. We couldn't make it work long term. We never quite got to the scale of growth or the scale of operation where it could operate itself as a viable operation. And as a result, we've closed down that experiment, if you like, and now we're thinking about what next. And we do think there is a case for what's next, because last time I looked, our economy was still causing environmental degradation and social injustice, and so there is still a need to experiment in this area. But we didn't find the perfect thing with the Bristol Pound, or it wasn't the exact right place to do it.
Could you unpack that a little bit for us? What I would hate to say what went wrong, because with any experiment, the whole point of doing an experiment is to see what happens. So you can never really fail when you do an experiment. But why wasn't there perhaps a level of success that you were expecting?
We started growing, really, really well, and everyone's like, "Yeah, brilliant! In 5 years' time, we're going to have, 100,000 people on this system, and everyone's going to be shopping locally." So, the question is, why did we get this far and then plateau off and then start to go downhill? And I think that's a lot to do with brand and marketing. And I don't think it's just local currencies that suffer from this. I think this is a general problem with green movements and social movements, where you start off thinking, right, we've got to clearly explain what it is we're doing. For us, clearly explaining why we were doing this was a lot of economic stuff with long words like the local multiplier effect. It's not a particularly easy thing to explain, but if you try and put it on the tin, this is what we're doing, the people that understand that, the low-hanging fruit, if you like, the people that are easy to gather into your movement will come along and join it and say, "Oh yeah, I get that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm in with that one." However, beyond those people that have already seen the light, if you like, it's very hard to make that case, especially if your tone of voice is a bit. Obviously this is really important, and you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be shopping at Tesco's, and frankly, that's just doing damage to our economy. It's like, well, hang on. In my area there is a Tesco's. There's not a load of independent shops, and why should I be being having your finger wagged at me for just my job is at Tesco's. I do stack the shelves there. I'm very grateful to Tesco's. They're a nice employer. Maybe there's all these other things, and we were in effect. It made us seem a bit elitist. One, you had to have time and money to be able to go to the independent shops and probably pay a premium price for a premium product. I could get my sliced white for 50p from Tesco's, or I could get an ancient grains organic spelt something or other for 10 times that. That's the kind of problem we were working with. So one, there was this kind of slightly angry or slightly condescending tone of voice perhaps, and then as well there was a kind of exclusionary thing around making it difficult for people because they would have to travel more and go to several shops and pay a premium. So that was one problem in terms of getting the people on board. Then for the businesses, and what we had said to the businesses in the beginning was, hey, we're going to get all of these people on board. They're all going to be coming to local shops, and your profits will go up. Well, those 2,000 people that we got on board, they were already people that were shopping at those local shops, because they were people that already agreed with what we were doing. And therefore, on the whole, those businesses didn't see a huge uptick in footfall and money in the till. And therefore, after a while, they started to say, hang on, the costs of us for processing, having another payment method, training up the staff, having to reconcile another bank account, having to try and integrate with our systems, this is just an extra headache we don't need. Mm-hmm. So, we thought we were helping people and helping businesses. In the end, we were actually creating some headaches for the very businesses we were trying to help. So I think that would be my nutshell. There were also other problems around tech. and also around the regulatory framework options that existed back in 2010 when we were developing the original Bristol Pound scheme. It was before Electronic Money Institute regulations had been developed, which made us very dependent on having another regulated back-end partner. We chose the local credit union because they were very aligned to us in terms of their social mission. But it meant that overall our tech stack, if you like, was quite glitchy, costly and difficult to maintain. And it also meant we didn't have any access to our own data because the credit union owned that transaction data. So if I wanted to find out, oh, I wonder which businesses are maybe not spending the money they're getting in through the till within the network, I couldn't find that out. I wasn't allowed to know. Equally, I couldn't say, hey, look at our business of the month. Look at how much trade they've done in Bristol Pounds. I couldn't do that because I wasn't allowed to see the data. So yeah, I think that's most of the problems.
The tone of the voice, I'd like to pick up on that because I just recently read some research about the Transition Town movement, and I think from 2010, which is when you were doing the Bristol Pound. I think 84% of the people involved in the movement were white, middle class, and had a university background, and that's not reflective of the town or of society. And I think that is really important. And I think the Green movement can come across as quite moralistic and quite paternal and maternal in telling people what to do. So I think that's really important that you've looked to address that. The second point, and one that I really wanted to pick up on, was part of the failure you said was that, if I could paraphrase it, there was really a misunderstanding about what a currency actually is and what a currency does. Do you think that translates right across to a misunderstanding of how sterling is used and what sterling is and how the government spends and earns money? And do you think if people understand that a lot better, they would actually see how a supportive local currency could play its role within an economy?
Yeah, I mean, let's broaden it out to money. We're all brought up with an understanding of money from very early years. We tend to socialize our children with pocket money, which they learn to spend. They are starting to have ways of thinking about money to do with how much money they've got in their piggy bank, how much they're getting for their money. These sweeties more expensive or cheaper than these sweeties, and why would you waste money on something that when you could get a cheaper thing? I think a lot of us grow up with these kinds of attitudes, and the problem with money is that it's its own little system that is completely, here's the big world, if you like, and the people, and then money is this kind of thing sort of separate from it. All of those other real world impacts on people and on the planet are completely externalized to the money. And when we look at, when we're driven as a country by GDP, or when we're driven individually or as businesses by how much money we've got in the bank or our balance sheet or our profit and loss, these are encouraging us to look at everything as a transaction in which we are seeking gain, financial gain. It's looking at one form of capital, financial capital, rather than social capital and environmental capital. So I think at some point we have to address this. We have to explain to people that money is very one-dimensional and it doesn't tell the whole story. And I think a lot of people are thinking, well, we can put taxes in place or polluter pays type stuff and penalize the companies that are doing the most damage. There's a problem with that, in that they will just up all their prices to maintain their profits and their return to shareholders, and then everybody ends up paying the price for the companies that are not pulling their weight. So I really have I do not believe that we can fix our current problems just by focusing on our current financial driven economic system. And that for me is a big problem. And I guess that's, maybe we'll come on to this in a moment, but that's where I'm trying to play next, if you like, for our next experiment. How do we work with other forms of capital and trying to make things visible so that people aren't just taking decisions based on money, but they're basing their decisions on other things as well. I've been studying with a group of people in California called the Metacurrency Project, and they're looking at currency as current-c, that the purpose of a currency is to visualize flows. And I think that takes us into a much wider understanding of currency than just money. I think you're talking about money rather than currency. And I think, yes, we can design money in different ways to encourage different sorts of market-based interactions. And undoubtedly that work also needs to be done. And yes, it's poorly understood. And yes, this is perhaps where regulation and taxes or incentives can come in and try. But I just never think they're going to be the whole story. So yes, I can understand governments and local governments thinking about money and about local forms of money or alternative forms of money that might pull levers in different way. But at the end of the day, all of that is still just focusing on trade, purchasing power, and trying to change people's market behaviors as opposed to, a wider understanding of their impact on people and planet.
Yeah, I think you've explained very eloquently some of the problems with having a local currency. This was something that when I was in Transition Town Tayport, we looked at, and we were following what was happening both in Lewis and Totnes, and we knew that Bristol was thinking about doing this as well. And from the perspective of trying to keep more money within your local economy and for it not to be leaking out of your local economy is a great goal. But you've explained why really that's quite difficult to manage. I mean, obviously, if you're the government and you're running a fiat currency, you have a whole army of people who you're paying in that fiat currency to make that happen. And perhaps you're struggling to get people to make your local currency happen because you can't pay them to do it. They're doing it on a voluntary basis. You are going to start something else now. It's going to be called Bristol Pay. So you want to talk about what that's what's going to be different about that, Diane?
Sure. There are two halves really to what we are thinking about to come next. One is about real money, and the other is about tokens to measure or visualize some of these other forms of capital. So I'll start with the money bit because that's the easy bit. And the reason the money bit is needed and is important is number one, that's where people are. That's how we onboard the most people we possibly can with a very easy onboarding message, if you like. And that onboarding message is use Bristol Pay because it's the only non-profit currency that is raising funds for the voluntary sector in Bristol. So it's helping your local community project. And how will it do that? How will it raise funds? Most of the time when we go to a shop and we take our phone or card and tap it on a device, or we pay online, it goes from my account, which is in any old bank account. Actually, it's with Triodos because I care a lot about where my money is stored and its impact. And the banks, the traders or the shop's bank account, which might be in a completely different bank account. And then you need a kind of bridge that enables the money to kind of go from my account all the way to their account. And that bridge is provided by a load of third-party suppliers. I've got a card issuer from my bank that I'm paying for somehow. The shop has got maybe an iZettle thing or a WorldPay box or whatever, and they're probably paying for that, and they're paying a certain percentage on every transaction. And a lot of that money is picked up by Visa and MasterCard, who are operating that bridge, the main bit of the bridge between. So it's an open loop system that is inherently costly to provide. And one of the reasons it's costly is because of the amount of fraud in that system, because there's no direct contact between these two. So I've just realized that you can't see both my hands at once. That's better. So yeah, so there's no direct link between these accounts on separate systems. With a closed loop system, which is what we're planning on setting up, my account and the shop's account are on the same system. And so there's no need for a third party bridge between the two. It's just a simple free, basically, debit this account, credit that account, with no third-party costs. So yes, it will take some investment to set it up, but once it's set up, because everyone has an account on the same system, it's basically pretty much free to operate. And as a result, even if we, and to put this into perspective, in a city the size of Bristol, we've done a fair bit of work estimating in different ways how much money is lost in transaction charges to the city every year. And the figure is going up because more and more trade is moving, into digital payments. And it's currently around £60 million a year. So let's say we got a fifth of the transactions in Bristol, even after we've paid for running the platform. That's potentially £10 million a year of funding that we could be creating and channeling, or diverting away from Visa, MasterCard and all the rest of it, and channeling it into the voluntary sector in Bristol instead. And that's a huge prize. I mean, that puts existing funding of those organisations, it dwarfs it, frankly. The amount of money that the likes of the Quartet Community Foundation that is very much involved in funding that sector in Bristol currently, they don't have that much money to play with. So if we could add £10 million a year to their coffers, that is significant.
I've seen the roadmap as well to be able to do that. It does sound like it'll add a huge amount of value, and importantly, it's not new money. It's just redistributing money that's already in the system.
Exactly. Yeah. So it speaks into that localization of money, a bit like the original Bristol Pound, but where it's very different from the Bristol Pound is that this is about operating at scale. Tesco, please join Bristol Pay. Sainsbury, Lidl, Aldi, please join Bristol Pay. The more transactions we divert onto our system, the better for Bristol. So, and it starts as well, so the what's in it for the individual is, oh, of course I'd want to do this because I'm helping my local communities. And for traders and businesses, especially big businesses, it's like, okay, now we can prove to the council that we're doing something with social value. And so it's good for their CSR, it's good for their relationship with the local authority. So I think it will be a much easier ask for both businesses and individuals to join up. So that's the onboarding. It's the simple onboarding thing. Once people are onboarded, then we hope they will engage with the other part of the platform, which are tokens to measure some of the other forms of capital and the impact of other sorts of interaction.
The oversight. So I think a lot of people don't understand that fiat currency is essentially controlled by them because it's who they put in power. They decide in Parliament what they're going to spend. They tell the Treasury tells the Bank of England, and the Bank of England credits the accounts. That's as simple. That's exactly how it happens. So that our oversight of our fiat currency is a democratic process. I think a lot of people don't realise it, but it is. And our democratic process in the UK is anemic. So that's why it probably doesn't represent what a lot of people would like. So the oversight of this, how are you organising that?
Okay, so I think this is a really important point. And we want the platform to be a platform co-op, so that the stakeholders of that are the local implementations. And yes, of course, we're starting with Bristol Pay, but absolutely we're seeing Glasgow Pay or Scotland Pay, or that's definitely on our roadmap, with the overall platform being called, let's say, City Pay. I'm not saying that it will definitely will be, we may well have a rebrand at some point, but let's call it City Pay for now. So the idea is that is the platform co-op with probably multiple types of stakeholder, because there may well be some investors, although there will have to be patient capital, not venture capitalists wanting to make a load of money and exit and take us off track. It has to be, this is why we want it to be a cooperative, that the core purpose has to be at its heart. And the main power has to sit with the local implementations. The local implementations we want to set up as community benefit societies, so that it is the people who are the users of that system that have the power. One of the first tokens we're going to be setting up is a voting token. So if you imagine okay, let's imagine Scotland Pay. Individual residents in Scotland have their own account on it, and also organisations can have an account on it. So for example, the Scottish Wildlife Trust might have an account on it. And the Scottish Wildlife Trust, if it really wants to feel engaged with the people that are following it, could be giving out voting tokens and creating regular polls on the platform, trying to understand, what its people think, so that it doesn't go down the rabbit hole of we're only representing white middle class people with an educated background, which, as you say, is a common problem within the Green movement. So it would enable it to be much more representative of the many people it might follow, and to shift its decision-making processes internally accordingly. So it's trying to encourage a more cooperative or a more user-led approach, if you like, even amongst non-cooperative organizations on the platform. With my voting token, I can then see how I voted, but also importantly see what the final decision was, see the kind of, it was 40-20, whatever it was, and how many people didn't vote at all, which is again an important matter. If we're not asking the questions that get people to say what they're thinking, and we often think, oh well, people are apathetic, but it's often because we're not asking the right question or giving the right options as answers. So I think there's a lot to be done around increasing democratization of not just the voluntary sector. So the platform itself will obviously be developed along those lines, using those voting tokens, but we would love to see the platform used then for citizens assembly type interactions as well, so that local authorities can be more in touch with their residents and take their views into account. So yeah, a voting token is one of our earliest tokens, and the whole structure we want to be cooperative in nature.
Diana, you mentioned credit unions at the start of our chat. Where do you think they fit into this kind of money currency ecosystem?
I think they're vital. At the moment, thanks to a surveillance capitalist system where everybody is constantly being encouraged to buy more and more stuff that they don't really need to keep up with the Joneses, or at least that's kind of what the social media platforms are encouraging us to do. But the reason they're doing it is because the great big companies, if they're going to keep GDP high, they have to produce more stuff, and then they have to sell more stuff. And so to sell more stuff basically means, especially at a time when, frankly, cost of living is going up, wages, I know they say wages are going up as well, but frankly, we are all poorer than we were before the financial crash in real terms, or most of us anyway. And that, I think, is set to continue. I can't see an easy resolution to that. So, so the big companies just want to make more money, and the only way they can do that is by forcing us into debt. Given that constant pull of debt and the power of payday loan providers, and I think this is, and credit cards, the amount of money being made through interest. Through poor people who can't, being encouraged to buy things they can't afford just to keep UK PLC going and provide returns for shareholders. I find this insidious and dreadful. And so for me, credit unions are very important, because whilst we are in this debt-ridden culture, which, until we have perhaps some truly progressive economic systems, like a real universal basic income set at a level that meets people's needs, I think it's we're going to continue to struggle with debt. And so the role of credit unions in providing a fairer approach to managing debt, that's vital. That's vital. How do we instead get people to think, oh no, spending a load of money is a bad thing, not just because it makes me poorer, but or puts me in hock to people, but also because, fast fashion, buying clothes, throwing them away and replacing them the whole time is inherently bad for the environment. Buying a power drill so I can put up some shelves and then putting it in the attic and it never being used, and then when I get it out to put up some more shelves 3 years later, it doesn't work anymore because it's sort of rusted up in some way.
I think the average life expectancy of the use expectancy of a drill is 13 minutes.
Right.
Isn't that absolutely crazy that you would spend that amount of money on something that's for 30 minutes? But it's that circular economy idea, isn't it?
Exactly. So one of the other, so I've talked about voting tokens. I haven't really talked about some of the other token schemes that we would like. So one of them is a kind of an item reuse token, if you like, which with this idea, obviously it wouldn't work with a drill that only lasts 13 minutes, but with a well-made drill that is going to last longer than that, or a sewing machine, or maybe a fancy dress that you'd wear to a wedding and then not wear for a long time. These sorts of things you could create a token for. I'm sure we've all heard of NFTs these days being used to buy and sell kind of works of digital art. Well, in a similar way, you could use an NFT to link to a real world item. And as it is passed on from person to person or shared and used by different people, we could be increasing the value of that token sort of as a clocking up counter, so that we can start to tell some good news stories about the prevalence and importance of reusing, the gifting economy, the sharing economy, to maximize the use of each manufactured product, because every manufactured product has a negative environmental impact. It uses resources from the earth, it uses power, which is probably fossil power, in its manufacture and distribution, and then once we've stopped using it and it goes in the bin, it is actually creating a potentially a chemical waste, a physical waste, all kinds of problems that we then have to, and we're not good enough at maximizing the use of everything. So it's, how do we encourage that way of thinking? And we think there's a token in there. We think there's also a token in the modal shift in transport. We all need to get out of our cars and use buses.
Public transport.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to private. Yeah,
exactly.
Public wealth as opposed to private wealth. This is what we need to be thinking about in the future.
Yes, but it's also, so we can in Bristol, we've been building loads of cycle lanes recently, and that's great.
Strand started in Bristol.
But we can build as many bike lanes as we like. But if most business executives are still thinking, oh, well, it's not very cool to show up sweaty after a bike ride. I think it's better if I show up in a BMW, because that way I look the part. People trust my advice, and I look successful. We have to change those ways of thinking, those public perceptions, so that hey, no, it's cool and fine, even if you're a high-level executive, to show up slightly sweaty on a bike, and that's the expected norm. So the tokens are very much about trying to count and celebrate and create new societal norms from the data around positive behavior choices, if you like. Or how do we change people's views of themselves, but also society's views? That this comes from a model of behavior understanding called the ISM model, individual, social, and material, which says that this kind of nudge economics, oh well, if we provide the information and make it a bit cheaper for people to do the right thing, they'll just do the right thing. It doesn't happen. It does in some areas, but it doesn't happen in lots of areas. My fictitious business executive is already paying through the nose in fuel tax and road tax, and this a slight change in taxes in the future would not be the thing that makes them say, okay, now I'll go on the bus, or I'll jump on my bike. It's far more about those wider cultural beliefs and norms, and that's the level at which we need to work to make information available and to create different ways of seeing the world. Because at the moment we only see things, the only things that are really visible are money, and that's the biggest problem from my perspective.
Yeah, that's the idea of leverage points, isn't it? Trying to find something that actually significantly makes a difference to the way that the economy is shaped. Well, you've given us a really good journey. It's been really interesting seeing, the idea at the transition town in 2010, and then that experiment and where that's taken you and what you've learned from it, and landing on this kind of very tech-centered, very different approach to hopefully have the same ideas. A fascinating journey. I'm sure loads of people can learn a lot from you on that.
I think you've explained that really well. I wish you every success, because I think your aims are fantastic, and I think through that experiment with the Bristol Pound, going to Bristol Pay or Scot Pay, or Grampian Pay, where I am, sounds like a great idea. It seems like a really good way to keep wealth within your local economy.